Hi, this is Natu, a guy who's way too old and way too long involved in this game, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and for this one, my guest is going to be Dominator, funnily enough, now an old school Counter-Strike player, but in my day, you were one of the newer school players, I was around a few more years before, so let's jump into it in that sense, Dominator, because the team I remember you most notably rising up in was TSG, the Team Stomping Grounds, a team which history, as anyone might know by that name, comes from. It was like a LAN cafe, and then there was that guy Trickery, who was like always the in-game leader or whatever, and built up a lot of players. But as I know from the way the NA scene was back then, most people, by the time you hear of them, that's not really their first team, because there's the whole like CAL system, and maybe you play for a semi-pro team and then a low invite team, and you work your way up. So where was your beginnings in terms of actual competitive Counter-Strike, or what teams were you playing for at the beginning?
Yeah, the first team where we were actually serious was called RJ45.
Right,
and
yes.
Yeah, it was a group of guys mainly from Texas. And I think we made our way up through the Cal ranks to Cal I. We didn't finish very well our first season in Cal I, but I was able to actually go to my first CPL down in Dallas with those guys. And that's kind of where I started to get, more notoriety, I guess. So.
When you would go to a tournament like that back in the day, was it really just as unglamorous of like everyone just gets in a car and drives there, or like gets in a minibus or something? Like, how did you go to an event before the days of sponsors, etc.?
So actually, that first event, I had to talk my parents into driving down with me because I was still in high school.
How far away did you live?
It was like a 12-hour drive, probably.
All right.
Yeah, so I drove down there with my parents. We all got a hotel room. I stayed in the hotel room with my parents, and I went down and played video games for 18 hours a day during that. I mean, those events were awesome. So.
Okay, right. Since I know, even during the time when you were an active pro, you were one of the guys who was like more active. You worked out, etc. Are you one of these people who, when you were competing in Counter-Strike, did you kind of think of it like a sport, like something you were trying to improve in that sense?
Yeah, definitely. I was one of the few guys where I didn't play any other video games. I pretty much thought of it as work. So I would play Counter-Strike from 5 p.m. till 11 p.m. or something like that every day, and then I'd have my personal life. I went to college throughout my whole pro career pretty much as well. So.
Right. One of the things, okay, when you got to this TSG team, I gave some of the sort of background of the squad there, where it wasn't like, like a massive org or whatever. In fact, the team that you were in was the one where it became like actually a legit squad. Before that, it was like, low level Cal invite. But then when you were on the team, you actually won Cal invite one season. People might remember beating Team3D, etc. Like, was the timing actually of you as an individual player getting better, just coinciding with that? Had you already been good before, but you just didn't get your shot? What was the situation like?
Yeah, I think it was all kind of coming together at the same time. We had a really good roster. I mean, a lot of those players ended up going into either complexity like Sunman or 3D with Volcano and stuff like that. So it was awesome.
When you were on this team, one of the big results you got to have was the ESWC had already existed. It came around in 2003, but in 2004, when people knew by now, it's like a legit big event, they had a qualifier in the USA. And actually, your team wasn't one of the ones that was supposed to make it because, there was Team3D, there was the United 5 guys who were good at the time, and obviously NOA was going to this one. So actually, it was kind of like coming out of left field for people that your team made one of the top 2 spots at this qualifier, then went to the actual major itself, ESWC, and then got a top 4 finish. So was this actually your first event outside the US that you got to go to?
Yes, it was. It was pretty cool. I remember all that. We were definitely coming in as underdogs, played really well that tournament, or at the qualifier. And I remember calling my parents and telling them that I was going to Paris for the first for ESWC there. It was awesome. So.
Right. When you came up in this team, Like I said, it wasn't one that was like super famous at the time. As you mentioned, a lot of the players actually from this particular lineup did go on to some really great things, and like this was kind of like a starting point or a step on the way up, you know. But I want to ask you about what your rep was like in the scene, because I remember since you got, it seemed like you burst out of nowhere. You know, you were doing very well individually. There was a lot of players back in the day in the NA scene where they had like what we would call like a gatekeeper mentality, like, you know, oh, we're the best and we've always been the best. So like in some weird way, you have to like prove it to them before they'll let you be the best. I mean, I often have references, but a personal friend of mine at the time was Moto from Team3D. And I can tell you, it wasn't just you, it was everyone who just came along after him, basically. So like Method or Dominator, funny enough, people who ended up on Team3D, he would always, for the first few years, be in like mad denial that they were any good. And he'd always have like some like, he'd either think they cheated or there was some, it's just, they're only good online and they'd never beat us online. You know, he'd always had some weird reason. Right. Was the rest of the scene like that? Because I know, you know, it was very segmented, like the West Coast guys were by themselves and then there's people on another team. Was it hard to prove yourself as a player in the NACS scene?
You know, I wouldn't say so. I didn't really pay attention to any of that stuff at all. I probably had some of those biases myself once I was on 3D for a little while. Right. And some of those, you know, up and coming guys start to, you know, get the better of you online and stuff like that. But you know, I never paid attention to that. I always kind of had the mindset that I was good enough to be one of the best. So I didn't pay attention.
Did the fact that, as you mentioned before, Volcano played in this TSG team, and obviously he went before you to Team3D because he went that very same year, whereas you went the next year. Was that part of like how you eventually got into the team, or was that just unconnected?
Yeah, I think there was definitely some connection there. The bigger connection was CBZ, if you remember him from TSG. Yes. And, you know, I was really probably, you know, better friends with him outside of the game. Sal, Volcano, he's just a little bit more quiet, you know. And we were always great friends. But CBZ was probably the one who stuck his neck out for me and kind of got me my tryout and on the team,
So a lot of people might not know this because one of the weird things about the Counter-Strike scene and the fact that Counter-Strike still exists as an esport is when you look back, and if you're just looking on the internet at a Wikipedia or something, you know, it might look like the scene's similar to now. You know, we've got big tournaments, we've got pro teams, people move between the teams, you can win prize money, but obviously the scene was much, much smaller back then. And one aspect that I'm bringing up now as context is a lot of teams at the time actually didn't have great sponsorship. So if they had sponsorship, that's all they had. You know, you went to the event, you might not get paid anything though. You might not have a salary. And so even if you're very good, and obviously, you know, you can take heart in the fact that, hey, I'm one of the best players. It's different when you can get like a proper salary and you feel like it's your real job. If you were in a team like TSG, did you actually get any salary in a team like that?
No, we didn't. So our first sponsor was some rich kid out of Seattle, and Trickery actually moved out there and lived with the guy for a little while.
Okay.
All that I really knew was that this guy was like a genius, and he had started doing some sort of coding for, you know, some of the tech companies out there, and was making just so much money he didn't know what to do with it because he was only like 18 at the time. So he decided to sponsor a Counter-Strike team, and for one of our events, they bought like a shuttle bus. And it used to be like a party bus, and it actually had a stripper pole in the middle of it. And we were supposed to drive that to events, but it broke down on the first trip to one of the events. So yeah, that was kind of the state of where we were at that time. So
okay. So then was it, as someone who, you know, as we say, was trying to compete seriously and wasn't just fucking around? Because one of the reasons as context for viewers as to why the scene was very weird like that, you know, and people were sort of like very suspicious of newcomers and stuff was because it wasn't as much money and it wasn't like a proper sport, you know. In a proper sport, if you see a guy who's coming up, you want him to join your team so you can win, you know. That's the sporting mentality. But back then, when all people had was their reputation, that's the thing they really care about. So was it a big deal to actually get invited to a team like Team3D? What did that mean?
Yeah, it was a big deal. It meant that, you know, I mean, I was going through college, paying my way through. You know, I had summertime jobs and stuff like that on the side before I got on 3D. But once I got on 3D, I didn't have to have other jobs. I could actually make enough money just for my salary to at least pay my living expenses. It didn't pay my way all through college or anything like that, but some of the winnings helped, that's for sure.
Okay, so people might know the story that Team 3D won 2 World Cyber Games. Now, one was before you were there. It was the one where they still had like bombs, I think it was, and they won the one that was in condition 0. But then 2005 was the really weird one, because I often have to explain this context, which is because the World Cyber Games decided the tournament was in CS Source, the grand finals are going to be in CS Source no matter what. But then bizarrely, a lot of regions, including the USA, decided to host the qualifier in CS 1.6. And so, unfortunately, that meant that on the one hand, you know, if you like 1.6, it's good because the teams at least get to go to the finals. But famously, if you're a CS Source team, you were sort of shit out of luck. So I remember there was a storyline, right, where one of the things that Team 3D did when you were on it is to get like into shape in Source, you practiced with the best NA Source team, which is Powers Gaming, right? Can you relay some of this, like what you guys did?
Yeah, you know, I don't even remember if we did anything that different. You know, for the most part, you load up that game and scrim with the best teams in that game, and that's what we tried to do. So, and I don't even remember the qualifier being in 1.6. I'm glad you brought that up. That's crazy. I do remember beating Complexity though, and those were always tough games. So,
was Source a very different game? I mean, this is the beginning of Source coming out for so anyone who played it years later, I believe it changed. But was it very different from 1.6 at the time?
You know, it's a little bit different, you know, but I liked Source as well. You know, I did did well in the Championship Gaming Series, which was all Source, and so I liked Source. I was one of the guys who wasn't really complaining about it too much when everything kind of started to switch over. Okay,
so as I referenced, this was also another one of the World Championship titles for Team 3D was this World Cyber Games, and you won it, you got the gold medal, and this also was one where it was in an exotic country. It was in Singapore, right? So what was that experience like?
Dude, Singapore was sweet. We were scared going there because you hear rumors about like if you spit your gum out on the ground, you get caned or something like that. Okay. But luckily nothing like that ended up happening to us. But no, it's an amazingly clean city. You know, some of when you travel abroad, sometimes you drive through those bad areas and you see graffiti and all that sort of stuff. Singapore was gorgeous. And yeah, it was a great experience to travel all of the places that we were able to go.
In the first year you were in Team 3D was where they also had some tournaments where it didn't go great like this. You didn't win like you did at the World Cyber Games. There were some tournaments where, you know, they didn't have a top placing. And to be fair, this was something which had actually been a problem in Team 3D for a couple of years before you joined. Because famously, they'd gotten into kind of a cycle where what they would do was they had all these really good players. So on the one hand, if you look at the lineup, you think, how can I cut any of these players, you know? But then what they would do was whoever was like lacking motivation or was playing the worst, they'd kick that guy out and then they'd recruit another really good player. And the problem with this approach, obviously, is you've got loads of talent. I mean, you see this in sports teams sometimes, but they couldn't necessarily always make the most of it. So being as later on, there was a lot of success that came along and the team did rejuvenate. What do you think the problem in Team 3D was like when you arrived?
You know, I thought about this quite a bit. I think that, you know, first of all, we're all immature. You know, we're all like 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, me included for sure. I wish I could go back and slap myself and tell myself a few different things, maybe change my mindset a little bit. And same probably goes for everybody else on the team. I think that for the most part, a lot of times when you get to the top sponsored team like 3D, you know, you're making more than everybody else. You're supposed to win all the tournaments. And at least for the roster that I was on that was performing the best with shaGuar and Method, I think that one of the main problems was that none of us were all motivated at the same level at the same time. And so we never really clicked and were able to just show our full force. And I also think that Counter-Strike is random, and still is. Just watching the tournaments nowadays, you can see that because it's really hard for top teams to win every single event. I mean, look at FaZe Clan or something like that, you know. But I think that the format today helps to even that out a little bit, where they play best of 3 maps, or they play round robins and blah, 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 blah. All the tournaments we played back then were, double elimination type tournaments where you play 1 map. You don't get to eliminate maps, or if you have one bad map,
get a pick, right? It was just already decided.
Exactly. It's already decided, all that stuff. So that played into it too.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that one, actually. Okay, what about this then? When you said there that the lineup with Method and shaGuar, which was obviously one of the ones that eventually had a lot of success the next year, 2006, right? Here's the thing. This is actually not a secret, Dominator. So I don't know if you were alluding to this before, but one of the things that I believe shaGuar himself would even admit, I think he might have done when I did an interview with him, is I know a lot of people who were teammates of shaGuar's, and even the ones who really liked him were like, yeah, I really liked him. He's a really great player. Terrible practice player, though. Like, I had a million excuses, as to why he didn't have to come on time, or why. Like, I think one person told me, like, in a joking manner, that they felt like his brother had a birthday like 3 times in 1 year or something. Always has some reason why. Was there some of this in the squad? With the players where they're veteran players, they've been around a long time, so fair enough, you can get burned out. But were there issues getting people to like practice like a professional, like you were talking about earlier?
Yes. Yep. For the most part, not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but yeah, shaGuar had a few of those. Method, he had a few of those. For the most part, that was one thing about me. I was pretty professional, so I always showed up on time and stuff like that. So did Sal of Volcano. Moto was always very professional. Rambo. K Sharp could be a little bit flaky here and there, but but for the most part, when he was in the lineup, he was professional as well. So
were you one of those guys where, because like people like obviously Rambo, K-Sharp, Moto, these guys were already very established when you first came into the scene. In fact, they were the top dogs, they'd already won big tournaments. Was it anything significant to you to get to play with people like this who were kind of already to some degree legendary names, right?
I think the bigger thing was like when I first got into Cal Invite and on RJ45, when we got our butts kicked, when we got to play against those guys, that was probably the first time where I kind of realized, oh man, I'm playing against the best now. So by the time, I made it onto 3D, we had already beat 3D as TSG, more than once. And so it wasn't that big of a deal for me at that point.
Okay. When you would practice in a team like Team 3D, but when you get to that level, if you're in 3D, you're in complexity, the very, very top squads. Sure, if you go to a tournament like a CPL, you're going to play some North American teams, and you're going to play some teams and you practice, etc. What was it like trying to practice, though, knowing that when you play the big European teams, the only times you can play them is when you're at the other international tournaments. So you're only going to get, maybe 3-4 times if you're lucky in a year to play them. Is it tough to play players and teams that you don't have a lot of experience against, or you kind of can't scout in the same way? I mean, obviously people watching this today will think we just watched the demo or whatever. It's like, it wasn't quite that simple back then.
Yeah, it wasn't as simple as just watching demos back then. There weren't that many demos out, first of all. Yes. And you could do a little bit of that, but yeah, it was different. There were some teams where you would go to a tournament and, like I said, you play 1 map against some random team from China or something like that, and they play this really weird play style to where, you get down a few rounds or you lose some of the big money rounds, like, the pistols or the 4th round buy round or something like that, and you're going to lose the map because you're not ready for those type of strategies,
Okay. So when you alluded to before that at the World Cyber Games qualifier, you beat Complexity, this was actually the period where Complexity actually was the number 1 team. They were the ones who won ESWC, and they'd been a fantastic squad and they'd beaten 3D a bunch, but then 3D made some roster moves, and it was kind of back and forwards from there on. You beat them sometimes, they beat you sometimes. What did you think of the Complexity squad? Because that seems like a team where one of the reasons I had a lot of respect for them is I know that they did, put in a lot of practice, and because some of them, weren't the biggest names at the time. Some of them, had been in squads that hadn't made it to the top, or they'd been kicked out of squads, or they'd had their issues. It seemed like they had a good work ethic. Right? Did you have was it a positive rivalry? Did you have any animosity towards them?
You always have a little bit of animosity towards somebody who's beaten you some of the time, and not gonna lie, was jealous of of their success as well, because we always played them very close, but they definitely were able to pull out a lot more victories than us at tournaments. And but you got to give them props. I mean, we saw those guys all the time. I still talk to Jason Lake every once in a while. He's a great guy. He's actually from Iowa, which is where I'm from, if you didn't know that. But no, I love all those guys. And, you know, I think that, like I was saying, where I wish that 3D, everyone was motivated at the same time and at the same level so that we could have brought it full force. And I think that's what happened with them. They were all kind of underdogs, almost like what TSG was, except the roster didn't get broken up and they kind of got to stay together a little bit and start crushing it. So.
Okay. Right. Off the top of my head, when you, in the 2006 year, when you had a bunch of really good results, this is where you had, like, again, ESWC did very well at. There was, I think the one I wanted to talk about, though, is the WSVG. Do you remember this one where it was like a new circuit, and the whole point of the circuit was, sure, they had other tournaments. So, for example, you won like the one that was in Louisville, which was like mainly NA teams. But the whole point of the circuit was to build into the grand finals. And if you remember, the hype around the grand finals was like, first place, you not only got $50,000 if you won, but the other gimmick was like you got like a Rolex watch or something ridiculous. And for people who don't know this story, it's a very weird story because every team was gunning for this as the big tournament. In fact, because it had bigger prize money, people wanted to win this more than they wanted to win the CPL, you know, because this was like, everyone thought this is the new thing. And so if you ever look at the lineup of teams that were at this one, there's loads of really good teams. In fact, there's even teams that, like, you know, for the next years were the best in Europe, like the Polish guys in Pentagram and Fnatic with Forrest and Khan, and, you know, all these players that people definitely going to know when I'm referencing them. But bizarrely, your team made it to the final and unfortunately didn't win. It was obviously a very epically close game. But the team you were playing was a very unusual circumstance because the team, Alternate Attacks from Germany, earlier in the year had been one of the best teams. You know, they'd been in big finals, but they had this very weird scenario where, like, some of their players got bought by the rival German team, Mouse Sports. And so then they did something like they went to the finals of the tournament with like one guy who was a stand-in, who I believe was like their manager who used to play like years before. And then another guy who was a really good player from Germany, but wasn't like an official member. So they went with like a sort of a mixed team. And obviously they won this event and you guys finished second. So what would you say about this event?
You know, it was a good event. It was one of those, again, double elimination tournament. I think we lost like in the second or third round. We made our way up through the lower bracket to make it to the finals. And so we would have had to beat them twice. I think we ended up losing in the first map, though, in overtime or something like that. And it was really close. I was where there's a famous video of me where I stand up while I'm defusing and yell, "You suck," because they were trying to knife me. Those guys were jerks. I didn't like those guys very much. They were all talking a lot of crap during the game and stuff. So I wasn't the only one standing up and yelling at them. But I believe
that's also the one, right, where you had a bizarre, I think it was you, where you had like a scenario where you won like a 1v1 and you did a diffuse, and it was that old diffuse bug where sometimes, you know, it shows that it's diffused, but then the bomb still explodes like a millisecond later. I think that there's a video like that online of that. Yeah.
I was a millisecond too late. And it was a 1v3. The guy tried to knife me. I killed him, tried to defuse, thought I was going to get it, didn't get it. So that was tough. That was a tough one, man.
As someone who is a competitive person, how do you handle it if you're in like a final? And like you say in this one, you know, close game. How do you handle it if you lose? Because, you know, like as an outsider, a lot of fans, if they've never been in that position, might think naively like, oh, second's good, you know, hey, I've still won prize money. But like, what's the mentality like if you feel like you had a chance to win and you lose?
Man, I took losing really bad back then. Part of that immaturity I was telling you about, but yeah, I would probably go into a funk for a whole week, you know, mad at the world for a while afterwards, just thinking about all the mistakes that we possibly made, what we could have done better, you know, went through all the excuses of why it's not my fault, all the reasons why it is my fault, all that sort of stuff. So.
Right. since at the end of 2006 going into 2007 is when the whole scene found out, right? There's going to be this thing, you referred to it before, the Championship Gaming Series, CGS, and at the time, everything about it sounded exciting because it was like, right, it's going to be on television, on cable, they're going to buy the franchises, they're going to put all this money in, and most people really thought like, right, this is like gaming's chance to go huge, you know, because here's the thing, the scene was at a good level here, it got to a high level, but it was hard to see in the normal scene of, you know, CPLs and stuff, how it was going to go much higher, you know, like it would have had to get a lot more investment. In fact, it'd have to be like today, basically. There'd have to be massive companies coming in. So were you excited when you heard about the prospect of the CGS?
Yeah, I think we all were, you know, it was something big that we all thought was going to be the next big thing. And everybody who was big in the scene was behind it as well. You know, Jason Lake and Craig Levine and all the best players were in for it as well. So it was big.
Did the fact that you'd played Source before, and that was obviously one of the big differences, is it was going to have to be played in CS Source. They weren't going to use 1.6. Did you not mind that?
No, I didn't mind that.
Okay. Right. What would you say about your time in CGS? Like, what did you actually think of the real like competition and stuff? I know one of the things people often thought was a downside was like the whole franchise format thing. It was a bit weird, you know, like, I mean, sometimes it doesn't really matter who wins the CS match. It matters if like the person who's doing a driving game comes first place. So it feels a bit weird, you know, to have all your hopes rested on that. But what did you actually think before like the part where it went bad at the end where the league died? What did you think of when it was actually up and running? Like, did you enjoy the experience getting to go to LA for a while, playing the teams, etc.?
I mean, yeah, as far as an experience, it was great. You know, got to move out to LA for 2 different summers. They always took really good care of us out there. They paid us well. You know, it was more salary than what I was making on 3D. The problem was there wasn't really any tournaments then to supplement your income throughout the year either. But for the most part, they took care of us. It was kind of an interesting format. You know, I don't think that's the way gaming should go today, with, you know, different games and stuff like that, because it was, you could win Counter-Strike by a pretty decent margin and still lose as a franchise to somebody else. So that stuff. Okay.
Do you actually think, I mean, one of the reasons it later turned out that the actual project failed was a report was actually done after it died that showed that basically they'd like way overspent their budget. Like, I believe the original plan of what they were given by like the television studio was like they were given something like 50 million, but it was supposed to last like 3 years. And I believe like 1.5 seasons in, they'd spent like 45 million of that or something. It was some like ludicrous thing where when you hear that, you just think like, yeah, this could have never succeeded. But beyond things like that, which, you know, as a player, you have no control over that. You don't know that's going on. Do you actually think like the premise could have worked at that point in time? Like, was television like ready to watch some esports, do you think?
You know, I think that's the other thing too. I don't think that we were ready yet. And that's the thing that they did wrong. They tried to do it over, you know, direct TV, over with regular viewers, you know, people who are watching TV. Today we have Twitch. So there's already, you know, millions and millions of people who are watching Twitch and watching people play video games already. I mean, now, as you can see, I mean, I think I watched an E-League finals. Is that the one where Cloud9 won the finals? I was watching that.
Yes.
Yeah, against the major against FaZe, and it was a great game, by the way. But you know, there's like 1 million people watching, and it was awesome. So that was their problem. They're spending all this money on first of all these games that I don't know if people have even really watched all that much, but even people who played games weren't really used to watching it on TV or something like that. So that was the issue.
Okay. Right. One of the downsides of CGS, and this is something a lot of people like why people only look back on the negatives, is because it took all these pro players who were the best in North America. And as you say, initially it was a great thing. You know, they thought like, right, this is a chance for my career to go somewhere bigger. Obviously, as you're saying, you get paid a proper salary at a time when, you know, like you got a salary in Team 3D, but the difference is it was probably like half as much, you know. So, you know, people are getting now, they feel like it's a proper salary. The downside of that is when CGS died, it's not like these players couldn't have come back. You know, there was still CS 1.6, you know, we still had a scene. It's that for a lot of people, it kind of like represented the hope that it was going to get bigger. And then when it died, they were like, oh, I can't go back to playing in like a team with a smaller team and losing my salary. You know, I've told all my family I've got a salary now. A lot of people I know either just straight retired or kind of lost faith in the concept of esports. Like, what was it like for you?
Yeah, it was tough. One thing that happened with me is that I had graduated from college this summer, it would have been like May, right before CGS started. And so when I came back, I got a full-time job. And then I think it was like that fall or winter or something like that, they decided they were going to be done with the CGS. And it was right during the economic downturn and all that stuff. Yes. So I had a full-time job. I decided it was timing for me. I figured I might as well just start my career in business and go from there. So that was, you know, I really wish I would have stayed more involved and maybe played on the side, but you know, that was 10 years ago probably. And I'm married now. I have kids and have a pretty good career going. So I can't complain.
Sure. I mean, that's the thing. Obviously, no one could know where things are going to go. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people with that story. They're like, oh, if I just kept my foot in, who knows what could happen. What about this then? Looking back over your career, how would you describe yourself as a player, as a competitor? What type of person do you think you were?
You know, you watch basketball at all? The NBA?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite sports. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I would probably, not that I've had this much success, but I would compare myself to maybe like a Draymond Green on the Warriors.
Okay.
You know, I'm not the guy who's going to go out and get you all the points and be flashy and like Steph Curry or LeBron, who can just pretty much wow everybody. You know, that was Method or shaGuar or K-Sharp on our team. I was the guy who was kind of doing the dirty work and always reliable. And I wasn't afraid to get in somebody's face either. So.
Okay. What do you think in the game? What was your skill set like?
You know, definitely entry fragger, slash, you know, rifler, and I think I was pretty good in clutch situations. I mean, who knows what my stats were, but I think if they would have, you know, kept stats on stuff like that, I probably would have had some pretty good numbers on one-on-ones, 1v2s, things like that. Because I do remember, well, I suppose everybody remembers their good moments like that, but I remember winning some big 1v3, 1v4s in some tournaments on pistol rounds and things like that had to change the game for us. So.
Were you someone where, I mean, because you played in a bunch of different teams and, you know, the system that the in-game leaders run in teams can be very different. Were you someone who liked like a tactical system where like, you know exactly what you're supposed to do in a round, or, you know, where someone flashes and who looks at what corner? Did you like more of a loose system where, you know, you play a bit more of individual bit? What was it? What was your preferred style, do you think?
Yeah, I think I liked the tactical situation more. Because I always knew what my teammates were doing, and so, you know, I think that is important. But obviously, there's a bunch of different play styles that fit everybody, and so you know, thing is about Counter-Strike, like I said, it's random, and so if you can catch people off guard, sometimes it helps just to kind of free flow a little bit and make sure you can get your picks and stuff like that. If you get too predictable, it's not very good either. So I'd say I'd probably lean towards the structured strategies a little bit more. but still open to do a little bit of free flowing and get picks and do what you need to do.
Okay. Right, I wanted to ask you about a few of the big names that you played with, like the famous teammates, and see either, like what were they like to play with as a player, as a teammate, or personalities, or something interesting you can tell us. So how about, I mean, you referenced earlier Rambo. Now, the thing that people won't know about Rambo is that when he was a pro player, he was actually very famous for being super quiet. Like, he's not someone who ever, I don't think, barely ever did any interviews, I mean, we didn't have Twitter back then, but he wasn't on any forums, right? Anything, He's just kind of a guy who just played the game. And funnily enough, you referenced earlier, played fucking, I mean, here's all you need to know about Rambo, right? I once asked him when Dota 2 became really big and got a lot of money, like, oh, are you into Dota 2, Ronald? He was like, nah, I'm bored of Dota because I already played like 8,000 games when it was Dota 1 or something. I was like, wait a minute, while you were a pro? And he was like, yeah, I used to do that when I wasn't playing CS. I was like, how many fucking hours of games were you playing in it? So what was this guy like as a teammate, as a player to play with?
Dude, I love Ron. He was great. Always professional, always wanted to win, willing to put the time in demos, strategies, all that type of stuff. And he's a little bit quiet, but when you get to know him, he's a good communicator in game. And I do remember my first LAN tournament with 3D. It was some small event we were playing in New York City, and we like won an eco round or something like that, where I deagled like 4 guys in the head and we won the eco round. So of course, being me, I stand up and yell at the team who's only sitting like 10 feet away from us, like, as loud as I can, how do you like that? Or whatever, I'm yelling at the guys. And I remember Ron telling me, he's like, he had this look on his face like he was just disgusted. And he's like, oh, great, this is the new Team3D, I guess. Okay. And so I don't know if he really was welcoming me at first. I've never really talked to him about that, but we became pretty good friends, over the next couple years. So.
Okay. And since we referred to him earlier and you played with him in 2 different teams, what about Volcano? Because obviously he was with you in TSG and then later again in 3D.
Yeah. Sal was always one of my best friends. He's, again, great communicator in game, very professional, always showed up on time, had input on strategies and things like that. Smart player with great skill. And, Sal and I, once he got to be, legal age to drink, or if we were in a country that allowed drinking at an earlier age, we always ended up having a few drinks together and always had fun when we did. So, and actually, I always was a roommate of Sal's at a lot of the tournaments. And so me and Sal shared a room. And one thing about Sal that I remember too is that he took really long showers. So he would wake up like an hour before we actually had to wake up, and he would shower, because it took him like 45 minutes just to shower and get ready in the morning. But he was always willing to get up early and do it first and then wake me up afterwards. So.
That's actually something that, again, people would take for granted, knowing about like how big esports is now. But it wasn't even that many years ago. It was maybe only like 3 or 4 years ago that, for example, it got to the point where people get their own bedroom and stuff. You're not like 2 people in a room. And so people take for granted that if you're in a team, it doesn't really matter how good you are in the server. You have to be able to get along with that guy all the hours you're not playing the game and the travel. It takes a strain, right? It can be tough to keep players together.
Oh, definitely. And you're talking about 18-year-old kids, for the most part, navigating their way through airports. I was always, I actually had a lawn mowing business that I started when I was 12, and I ran that until probably when I got on 3D is when I stopped doing that. But I would, drive my mower around town and mow people's yards and collect money and stuff like that. So I think I was pretty capable to do things on my own. I wasn't scared to tackle anything, but for a lot of other people, I think it was a little bit scary. You're going to an airport all by yourself. You're supposed to go to France or Paris or whatever, this huge airport, and you're going to meet somebody at 5 o'clock that time or whenever. And this is before, cell phones are even really that big.
Yes.
You can't just get on your phone and on your iPhone and type up maps and all that stuff. It's like those are flip phones back then. So it was a little bit crazy.
Okay. Right. Since you've alluded to in the interview a couple of times, actually current CSGO, and you've even listed off some of the teams, etc. Like when CSGO came out like about 6 years ago now. In some ways, like, it took a couple of years to get going, but it revitalized Counter-Strike. Obviously, it became a big part of esports again. When CSGO came out, did you start playing it? When did you get aware again that it was like a thing?
No, I didn't start playing it. I actually took about 5 years off where I didn't play hardly any video games at all. And so just a couple years ago, I got a gaming computer and kind of started playing a little bit of CSGO, Fortnite, PUBG, even Overwatch a little bit, tried that out. And so, but the main reason I actually bought a gaming PC to get involved again was because E-League was on TBS. Right. And so I watched it on TV and it was awesome. And it brought back all these memories and things, and I kind of wanted to play again. So that's the reason I got back into it a little bit. I mean, casually. So, what
do you actually think of CS:GO? Like the game itself?
I think it's great. I think it just like 1.6. It has its flaws. It has some randomness to it. I think that it's different in the fact where it seems like the aggressor has a little bit of an advantage over the camper, compared to like 1.6. But
in 1.6, were you more of one of those players where you try to use the angle against someone and like you try and draw them in, etc.?
Yeah. Angles were definitely a lot bigger, and I think when I play CS:GO, I still try to do that a little bit, and it doesn't always work out in my favor. But I think that does make the game more exciting to watch. It's a little bit faster paced, and the people who are aggressors, I mean, you definitely have some crazier plays being made, by people like Stewie or something like that, where they're being super aggressive and are able to make things happen for the team. So,
okay, since you said there that you saw it on E-League, etc. Right, beyond just the cool part of the nostalgia of like, hey, I used to play a game like that, wow, it's on TV or whatever, do you actually enjoy watching matches when you sit down and watch one? Like, can you get into it in the same way?
Yep, I do. I actually have Twitch on my TV, so I can watch, E-League or ESL's on Facebook now, which is another story, which Facebook is not doing a very good job of having a good stream for them, But anyway, I think it's fun. I mean, obviously you have to, my wife doesn't like it. She's never really been into video games. But I think, you kind of got to know what's going on, but it's awesome, man. I was getting into that Cloud9 phase finals. Man, that was fun to watch.
It's a pretty good game, yeah.
Oh yeah. It was a great game to watch. And I try to sit down and at least watch some of the majors now whenever they come on.
Okay. Right. What about, when you look back on your career, obviously a lot of it, like we were talking about here, was like over 10 years ago now. You've lived your life since then. You've got a career, as you say, a family. How do you look back on your time as a professional gamer in Counter-Strike? Like, what do you think of it?
I mean, I think that it was a great experience. I mean, I got to travel around the world, got paid to play video games. It was kind of we were all kind of pioneers in what we were doing at that time. And so that was exciting about it. And it's awesome now to see where it's going because it kind of validates what we were doing back then as well. On the flip side of that, I have some regrets in the fact that I wish that I would have, I took it seriously, but like I said, I was immature. I wish I could give myself just a little bit more knowledge of how to be a better teammate and how to be just a better athlete kind of in general, how to look at things. And we had a lot of chances and we had a great team. We could have done a lot more than what we did and we didn't. So that's disappointing. But, I was able to win a major, even though it was source and controversial. We had some really good finishes and different things. I mean, when I was at the Championship Gaming Series, we actually won the Counter-Strike tournament because they have a tournament for each individual game as well. And so the last one that they had, we actually won in 2008. So that was fun. We got to beat everybody else. But yeah, I think that overall, I'll enjoy all the experiences and the people that I met. Definitely have some regrets about what could have been as well.
Sure. I think everyone has those, to be fair, but yeah, I definitely makes sense. Okay, what else then? Let's just do a couple of like rapid fire ones at the end where it's just like a simple question, just give me an answer, a reason why. So who do you think in your career was the smartest player you played with as a teammate? Who would fit that category?
As a teammate?
Yes.
I'd probably have to say shaGuar.
Okay.
Okay, why? I think that, you know, he was playing chess a lot of times when other people were playing checkers. And I think it just, his poker career today kind of shows, you know, his IQ is probably a lot higher than even above average. And so it was, we always butted, I did butt heads with him a little bit when we played and practiced together. He was always on me to try to tell me to do things differently or whatever, which was good. And I always didn't take it the best. But no, he's a really smart guy. And he always, when he was focused, he was a really, really, really great player.
Who do you think was the most skilled player you ever played with?
You know, as far as raw skill, probably K-Sharp, I would say. You know, that guy played a lot of World of Warcraft back in the day, you know, because that came out kind of like right when we were, right when I was on 3D. But that guy, you know, he could just jump on Counter-Strike and you know, kind of like Shroud now, if you ever watch his streams. He just has that kind of natural aim where he can kind of play any game and just be good at it. And K-Sharp was a little bit like that. So,
okay, who do you think was the most underrated player you played with?
Most underrated,
Because you know, there's always that guy where, from an outside, maybe you don't see what they do, or you don't see that, you know, maybe they're the one who makes a call or some like setup play or something, you know. And so I always think teammates themselves usually have a different ranking on who they think was good, you know.
Yeah, let's see. Who was the most underrated? I mean, can I say myself? Because I always felt like, you know, I was always kind of under the gun, and there was a time there too, even within the roster, like me and Moto would switch out, depending on how we were playing at the time. And so, you know, I think I definitely was underrated. And eventually, you know, there was a time when I really focused myself, and that was during the Championship Gaming Series. And I think at that time I was definitely one of the best players in the world, not just, you know, top 50 or something like that, which is probably what I was previously, but, you know, probably top 5 at one point for a 6-month stretch there during the Championship Gaming Series. So,
what about this one? Who do you think was the toughest player to play against? Like, is there someone in your career where they were always just doing well against your team or against you specifically?
You know, let's see. I'm going to name a few off. Fraud. He was always frustrating to play against. You know, he didn't back down against anybody, but if his op was on and you were playing against him, it was really frustrating. He would screw up all of your plans. You couldn't execute your strategies. Another player was Mo. When we played against Mo, same thing with his op. You know, he could screw up your strategies, and Mo would tell you about it too, which was the other thing that got under your skin. Aside from that, you know, some of the European players, let's see, if you remember when Counter-Strike had the money issue, whereas Terrorists, everybody started playing super slow.
Yes, just save and like try and screw the other team over, yeah.
Yeah, and that was was that SK that was doing a lot of that and winning tournaments?
So. Yeah.
Yeah, they were really frustrating to play against as a team when they were doing that. I mean, that was not the North American way to play at all, and that just threw everybody off.
Okay. Right. At the end of this interview, do you have like a final message for people, or maybe some people you want to thank or say hello to?
Yeah, I think that, if anybody's watching this from the old days, just want to say thank you to all my prior teammates. Craig Levine, Jason Lake, all those guys that stayed in it and made it what it is today as well. I think it's awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. And for the pro players that are playing today, man, you got a great opportunity. Don't waste it.
This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Dean Tanglis, Emanuel Särnbratt, J-Dubs, Nate DOGG, the Puyolup Tribe, Tobias Bernasconi, Zinged, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my shows? Maybe ask a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the guests on my next content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those donated discussions with me where we go really deep into the weeds. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the description box link below.